Hi, I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey. This video is another one of those recorded meetings of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership, whatever that is. I've had a lot of people ask me what's up with these meetings and why are we putting them on our YouTube channel. And the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership is a collaboration of organizations that have something to do with conserving woods and forests in Rhode Island. Foresters, forest landowners, conservationists, agency personnel. And if you're somebody who cares about woods or has something to do with the conservation of woods in Rhode Island, think of these as sort of newsletters from the forest. They're a little long if you're just looking for some of our usual content, explorations in the natural history of Rhode Island. But if you're interested in the conservation of woods, woods and forests, you might find something interesting in these videos and learn a little bit about how a whole system of organizations and people and agencies are all working together to conserve woods, forests, and forest-based jobs in Rhode Island. So here's another one. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, we might as well get started, but welcome to the June Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meeting. Good to have all of you here on such a beautiful day. Anticipate that we may have some partners who are out in the field, but we've got a good group, and we've got some new participants today. So why don't we'll just go around and introduce ourselves as we often do. My name is Christopher Riley. I'm the co-coordinator of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership with Kate Sales, and I divide my time working with the University of Rhode Island, largely supporting NRCS's forestry program, and then my practice, Sweet Birch Consulting. Let me go over to Paul.
Caught me off guard. Hi, everybody. Paul Rosselli, president of the Burrillville Land Trust, private nonprofit land trust in the northwest corner of Rhode Island, and a board member of the Civic Alliance for Cooler Rhode Island.
Thanks, Paul. Mark?
Hi, Mark Tremblay, consulting forester and outreach coordinator with RIFCO, which is the Rhode Island Forest Conservators Organization, the statewide Forest Landowners Association.
Thanks. How about you, Rupert?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rupert Friday. I'm the director for the Rhode Island Land Trust Council.
And let's go over to John.
John Mitchell, recent hire as Stewardship Coordinator with the Narragansett Bay Research Reserve here on Prudence Island.
Thanks. Glad to have you joining once again. How about Scott?
Good to be here.
Scott Millar, I'm the Director of Community Assistance and Conservation with Grow Smart Rhode Island.
Thank you. We'll go over to TJ.
TJ Boudreau, I'm the Deputy Chief of the Division of Forest Environment at DEM.
Thanks. How about David?
I'm David Gregg. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey.
Excellent. How about Marina? Are you able to talk, Marina? I can see the mute being lifted, but not able to hear you right now. Marina is with the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District, and my understanding is that she's largely moving into the role as the forestry and agriculture coordinator or manager as Kate moves on to her new role. You can see her chiming in the chat there. We'll go over to Fern.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fern Graves. I'm the Stewardship Coordinator with Division of Forest Environment.
Thanks. Patrick?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Pat Langloy, and I am a conservation planner with the Southern Rhode Island Conservation District, and a MESM student at URI.
Thanks. Jason, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jason Parent. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Rhode Island in the Department of Natural Resource Science. And I do work with GIS, remote sensing, applied towards forests.
Great, glad to have you with us today. And finally, Kate, I'm not sure if you're there right now, but if you are, would you like to introduce yourself? I think she'll be back a bit later on. I know that Scott, you wanted the opportunity, which we really appreciate, to give us an update on the what's going on with the Forest Conservation Act in the General Assembly, and wanted to give you the opportunity to do that now.
Thank you, Christopher. I know we usually do these updates at the end, but unfortunately I have another commitment, so I have to leave early. So I appreciate the opportunity just to give an update on this. I've got good news and uncertain news. First, the good news. As you may know, the Senate voted last week to unanimously approve the Forest Conservation Act. We heard from Senator Oyer that she thought that the act was really a no-brainer, and she was really pleased to vote it out of her committee and move it to the full Senate. We thought we were doing well in the House until it's funny how these things work. As soon as the Senate passed the bill, all of a sudden we heard a lot of rumblings on the House side that there were some concerns. First, we heard that one of the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee members had some concerns. So Ryan Mulcahy and TJ drafted some amendments to the act to address those concerns. And amendments are pretty much editorial in nature. They don't really make any substantial changes at all. And honestly, it was just really to try to satisfy one person's concerns. After those amendments were drafted, we thought we were good to go. Then we heard that out of the clear blue that Mayor Policina somehow had concerns with the bill. We tracked that down, found it wasn't true. Then we found it was the League of Cities and Towns that allegedly had some issues. I was able to track down Brian Daniels, and this is his busiest time of the year, but he very kindly contacted the Speaker's office to make it clear that no one in the League of Cities and Towns had any issues with the bill. Ryan Mulcahy and Ryan, by the way, has been working really hard on this. We felt like we were sort of chasing ghosts. I mean, we would sort of, we were just constantly addressing alleged concerns with the bill. As of yesterday afternoon, according to the bill sponsor in the House, we hope it's going to be scheduled for a vote next week out of the House Environment Committee, but we're not clear if it's going to be an amended bill or the original bill. The difference is if it's an amended bill, we could be running out of time because then that bill would have to go back to the Senate side, to the Senate Environment Committee for their consideration and then send it back out to the full Senate. And as you know, the budget is due to come out today. It's very likely that the session could be over by the end of next week. So we're just running out of time. Honestly, this has been pretty frustrating. It's certainly not my first go around with the General Assembly, but this has been frustrating because virtually no one has had any kind of negative testimony about the bill at all. We've heard nothing but very positive comments. We got testimony from a lot of different people that we didn't even expect that would come out and support the bill. So it's frustrating. Meanwhile, we have a call into the Speaker's office. We're just trying to get to the bottom of this. If anybody has any legitimate concerns, we'd just like to know what they are so we can address them if need be next year in a revised bill if it comes to that. And if there are no concerns, hopefully he would give it his approval to move forward this session. So the bottom line is if the bill doesn't get voted out of House Environment next week, it looks like the bill is dead for this year.
thanks for the update, Scott. A lot of different pieces there. That is frustrating about it being lodged in the House committee, especially given its success in the Senate. Of course, we'll all stay abreast of this. Is there anything that Woodland Partnership members can do in the meantime?
I wish there was. At this point, it's really in the hands of the speaker. If he decides that the bill is going to go forward, it will. So as soon as I hear for sure, I'll let everybody know. But I would like to thank everyone who worked really hard on preparing testimony, vetting the bill, getting it this far. It just would really be unfortunate and very disappointing if it doesn't pass this year.
Indeed, I know a lot of us, have worked on that. Particularly you and folks at DEM, and we will be hoping for the best and following closely along.
If there are no questions for me, I apologize. I do need to run. But again, thanks to everyone for their help and support.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks,
I
Scott.
just want to say hi. I am recording. I am here. I'm just going to be running back and forth, and I apologize for that. I'll be here. So if there are
Understood.
troubleshooting issues, I will be back and forth.
Doing well now. We'll see you, Scott. All right. Well, we'll shift over and looking forward to hearing from Jason Parent, I guess, who is a colleague, I guess I can say, now in the Department of Natural Resources Science at URI, who's been, working on the Stormwise project. I believe that's what he's going to talk about today, in an interesting and evolving area of forestry that really sort of falls in between traditional rural forestry and urban forest management. So I think there's it's an interesting area for innovation, not least in the area of remote sensing and GIS. So thanks for being here, Jason, and you can take it away.
Okay, thank you, Christopher, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm looking forward to presenting a couple of my research projects to the group, and also I'm looking for suggestions for the needs for the forest and conservation community to kind of guide my future projects at URI. And so, as Christopher mentioned, I had been involved with the Stormwise project when I was at the University of Connecticut before coming to URI a couple of years ago. The Stormwise project wasn't going to be the focus of my talk today, at least not the forest management part of it. I was going to focus more on the remote sensing aspect of it, which is more my area of expertise, but I'd be happy to talk more about the Stormwise. I will talk a bit about Stormwise. I'd be happy to go in more detail if anyone has interest or has questions about it. And I can certainly provide you with the contacts for the folks at UConn who are the experts on it. So let me share my screen. I do have some slides that can go through. And okay, hopefully everyone can see those slides.
Looks good.
And okay, thanks. So today I'm going to talk about my research that most of the research I'll talk about was done at the University of Connecticut a couple of years ago, and one of the projects is still ongoing. And the focus of my research at that time was forest management with regard to utilities, making forests more storm resistant, and identifying areas where forest management could help to mitigate storm damage and power outages. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to go in a little bit of detail about two projects that I've worked on, just to give you an overview of the kind of research that I do. And then I'd like to wrap up by talking about ideas for future projects, and also to see if anyone has suggestions about what the needs of the forest and conservation community are, so it can guide my future research. My goal is to have, for my research to actually be practical and useful to the community, And so I really like to connect with the forest and conservation community to make sure that my research is going to be useful to them. So as we all know, trees can be a problem, causing damage to our infrastructure and power lines. They're the biggest cause of storm-related outages in the United States, and they do cause massive damages to infrastructure. At the same time, I always like to point out that as we know, trees are very important, and particularly the roadside forest is important. You know, when working with the electric utilities, they seem to treat that roadside forest as if trees are the enemy, but they're actually very important ecologically and aesthetically, and they are a major source of revenue for the tourist industry, especially in the fall. And so my goal for my research is to help utilities better manage the forest, to both reduce the occurrence of power outages as well as apply more advanced forest management programs that actually make the forest healthier and so less resistant to damage from storms. And so the goal of the research is to promote resilience of the roadside forest. And resilience is basically allows increase the ability of the forest to adapt or to withstand damage and recover from storm damage. And vegetation management obviously is a key to improving the electric grid resilience. And so the questions that I'm going to focus on for today's presentation are to evaluate how well do the utility tree trimming practices work, particularly their enhanced tree trimming. How does it compare to their standard tree trimming? Does it actually work better, and is it worth the trade-off in terms of cost and you know, the effect on the aesthetic of the roadside forest? And the second question I'll focus on is where are the priority areas for these enhanced tree trimming programs or for the Stormwise vegetation management program. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of utility tree trimming programs, all utilities have a standard maintenance trimming program where they clear vegetation within a certain distance around the wires. This prevents branches from growing into the wires. And this is the kind of trimming where you end up with these Pac-Man shaped trees occasionally. They just clear branches in a certain radius. In more recent years, some utilities have adopted a more aggressive trimming program. Eversource in Connecticut calls it the Enhanced Tree Trimming Program, where they basically remove all vegetation above and below the wires within 8 lateral feet. And so obviously the enhanced tree trimming is more aggressive, it's more stressful to the trees, it doesn't look aesthetically appealing in some cases, and it's also a lot more expensive. And so the question we want to answer was, does it actually have a significant benefit in terms of reducing power outages compared to the standard trimming program? All utilities apply standard trimming throughout their entire electric grid every 4 to 5 years. But the enhanced tree trimming is basically a one-time event. And after they apply enhanced tree trimming to an area, then their standard trimming maintains the clearance according to the enhanced tree trimming. So the study area we worked with was the Eversource Energy Service area in Connecticut. This was back when I was at UConn, and we worked with Eversource. And their service area covers about 11,500 square kilometers. They have more than 27,000 kilometers of power lines. And overall in Connecticut, they have about 75% tree canopy cover across the state. So there's a lot of power lines, there's a lot of tree cover. And so remote sensing is one of the most effective ways of evaluating such a large study area in so many miles or kilometers of power lines. And so we had data that Eversource provided that indicated where they applied enhanced tree trimming between the years 2009 and 2017. We had data from the National Land Cover Database, which indicated percent tree cover for any given location. We also had outage locations between 2005 and 2017. And we had information on the utility's device exposure zones. So a device exposure zone is a segment of power line associated with a particular outage. And so if we have a little example here where the different colored lines indicate different device exposure zones. So we have our device exposure zone here indicated in green, and it is associated with an isolating device indicated by the star. An isolating device is either a fuse or other type of device that basically cuts the power if there's damage to the system. So it prevents power from flowing through damaged power lines. So if we have a tree that falls on the line, causes some damage at any location within this device exposure zone, then the location of the outage is actually reported at the isolating device. So we don't know precisely where that tree fell. All we know is that somewhere within that device exposure zone, a tree fell and caused damage. And so we don't have very precise information on the actual cause of the outages. One of the challenges that we face when trying to evaluate utility programs for mitigating outages is that we have a lot of variation in weather from one year to the next. So even though we have more and more power lines treated with enhanced tree trimming over the years, this chart shows how many thousands of kilometers of power lines have been treated with enhanced tree trimming between 2009 and 2015. And they've been steadily increasing in recent years or during that time period. But if you look at the number of storm outages per year, here we have thousands of outages per year between that same time period. Even though more of the system has been treated with enhanced tree trimming, we don't see the same pattern in terms of number of outages. So we have our maximum number of outages in 2011, 2012, when we had 3 major storms. Then things looked good between 2013, 2015, but then 2016, and obviously in 2020, we had a big spike in outages as we had some more storms those 3 years. And so we can't look at outage events before and after the enhanced trimming treatment to evaluate how well that treatment did, because the actual number of outages that we see is really dependent on the weather. And so we had to account for that when we tried to evaluate this program. So our strategy to account for weather and other environmental factors that could potentially overshadow the effect of the enhanced trimming treatment, to account for that, we paired treated lines with untreated lines. So lines that had received enhanced tree trimming were paired with lines that had not received enhanced tree trimming. And we tried to match those pairs of lines as closely as possible in terms of distance. So we only paired lines that were within 5 kilometers. They had to have similar length and similar percent tree cover. So to ensure that they had a similar exposure to the risk of power outages. And we also paired lines that had to have the same type of wire, whether they be covered or insulated wire versus bare wire. It turns out that most of the power lines are just bare wire. There's no insulation on them. Whereas in certain areas, they use power lines that have insulation on the wires to help prevent outages due to branches contacting those power lines. And so we tried to control for as many factors as we could that could potentially overshadow the effect of the trimming treatment. And so basically we have a treated line, treated with enhanced tree trimming, matched with a control line that is similar in every way except that it did not receive the enhanced trimming treatment. And by pairing the lines to have a control versus non-treatment lines, that's intended to control for weather and any other confounding factors. And we were able to find matches for 3,000 different pairs of treatment zones. We matched them with 3,000 different control zones. And so we had a good sample size. And so for each of those treatment and control zone pairs, we calculated the outage rates. And we calculated outage rates as the count of outages over a 3-year period before and after the year in which trimming occurred. And so we basically have the pre-treatment outage rate and the post-treatment outage rate. We used 3-year periods to increase the chance that we actually had a recorded outage during that time period. This is a case where data, if we have all zeros before and after the treatment, then it doesn't really tell us anything about what the treatment did. We need to have some actual outages in order to evaluate the treatment. And we calculated outage rates both before and after the treatment for the treatment and control zones. And so for each treatment and control zone, we calculated the relative outage rate by subtracting the control zone outage rate from the treatment zone outage rate. And this indicates the performance of the treated zone relative to the background rate of outages represented by the control zone. And so this relative outage rate should be ideally should be an effect of just the treatment with the effects of weather and other non-treatment factors removed. And so look at the results. In this graph, we have a box plot that shows a distribution of relative outage rates in the pre-treatment and post-treatment period. So if we have values that are greater than 0, that means the treatment zone did worse. Whereas if we have values less than 0, that means our enhanced tree trimming zones did better than their corresponding control zones. And the left box plot indicates the pre-treatment time period, and the right box plot indicates the post-treatment time period after enhanced tree trimming occurred. And we can see that in the post-treatment time period, we have a significantly lower mean and median relative outage rate, which means that we have significantly better results for zones that were trimmed with enhanced tree trimming. Before the treatment, we have basically no difference. The treated zones and the control zones are basically identical, which is what you would expect. But after treatment is applied, we find that enhanced tree trimming reduced outage rates by 130 to 310 outages per 1,000 kilometers per year. And that was a highly significant finding. Now, in any given year, storms will not necessarily affect the entire electric grid. So during our study period, we found that storms affected anywhere from 7 to 34% of the grid in a given year. And the benefits of enhanced tree trimming only apply to areas that are affected by storms. And so when we scale up the effects of ETT across the entire electric grid, we want to consider the actual amount or percentage of that grid that would be affected by storms in a given year. And so we calculated the overall reduction in outage rates for the entire grid by multiplying the rate, the reduced outages for storm areas times the fraction of the grid affected by storms. And this assumes that enhanced tree trimming is applied to all power lines within the electric grid. And so in a typical year, such as the year 2013, we found that enhanced tree trimming would have reduced the total amount of outages by about 16 to 38% for a typical year. In an extreme storm year like 2011, when we had 2 major storms in Connecticut, enhanced tree trimming would have reduced outages by 6 to 14%. So to conclude, ETT significantly reduced storm outages, and if it was applied to all of Eversource's area in Connecticut, it would have resulted in 320 to 760 fewer outages for a typical year, or 800 to 1,900 fewer outages in an extreme storm year. And this was the first study to actually control for weather and to use storm-related outages. A lot of other studies address the issue of variations in weather over time by not looking at storm-related outages. And so there was no good indication of how well trimming works at preventing storm-related outages. And we're also applying these similar methods to look at other resilience programs that the utilities are using. Okay, so The next question that I want to look at today as a focus of our research was using remote sensing to identify areas that are at the highest risk of outages and where they should be targeted for either enhanced tree trimming or the Stormwise program that the University of Connecticut has proposed for reducing storm outages. So these enhanced programs are expensive compared to the standard trimming programs. And they are long-term strategies, which means that it would take a long time to implement them across the entire electric grid, even for just Connecticut, which is a relatively small area. And some of these programs may be suitable for only certain types of areas. And so we want to make sure we target the areas where they're going to do the greatest good. So we want to use remote sensing to map areas where there is high vegetation risk, indicated by trees close to power lines or areas that have unfavorable forest conditions. And one of the tools we can use to do this is called LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. And we can actually use LiDAR to map trees, measure their heights, and to see if those trees can actually pose a threat to the power lines. The challenge that we had is that most LiDAR data that's freely available by the state is acquired during leaf-off conditions. So in Connecticut, the data were acquired in March of 2016 before the trees leafed out. And the government likes to collect data during this time in the leaf-off season so that they can get accurate data representing the ground surface, because they want to use the LiDAR to map terrain. And to do that, you need to make sure the LiDAR pulses can penetrate through the leaf canopy and actually reach the ground. So the problem is, if we have a leaf-on canopy, that laser pulse does not have to penetrate very far into that canopy, usually, in order to get a data point. As soon as that laser pulse hits enough leaf area, it reflects the laser energy back to the sensor and creates a data point. Now, if we have no leaves on the canopy, then the canopy has much less surface area, and that laser pulse is likely to penetrate deeper into that canopy before it finds enough biomass and material to reflect energy back to that sensor. And so we know that if we have leaf-off LiDAR data, there's going to be some bias in our estimates of tree height based on that data. And the question is, how large a bias is there actually going to be with this leaf-off LiDAR data? We want to make sure the data are precise enough to be actually meaningful for measuring tree height. So what we did was went in the field and measured the heights of 1,200 trees, including 19 deciduous species and representing open-grown and forest-grown trees. And these trees were sampled for 4 towns in northeastern Connecticut. And if we plot the field height measurements on the x-axis versus the heights estimated from the LiDAR data on the y-axis, we find that we have a very strong correlation between the LiDAR height predictions and the heights we measured in the field. We did find that LiDAR consistently underestimated tree heights by about 1.3 meters on average. And that was to be expected, but the magnitude of that underestimation is smaller than, is small enough so that the height measurements are useful. Now, there are certain species that have less dense canopy structure, like for example, white ash has fewer branches and thicker branches, and so we want to see if there is any variation among species in how accurate LiDAR was at estimating the tree heights. And we found that overall, while there were some significant differences among species in terms of the accuracy of the height estimate, it was overall not very large. And so in this figure of box plots, if the value is greater than 0, that means the LiDAR model overestimated heights. Less than 0, LiDAR underestimated heights. And so for all the species, or all except for one, the LiDAR underestimated tree heights. But even for the most extreme case, there was less than 2 meter bias, even for white ash, which had the greatest bias. it was still less than 2 meters. So that was close enough for what we were trying to do. And so we felt confident using the LiDAR data to create a canopy height model, which estimated the canopy height for any given location across the state. And creating a canopy height model, conceptually it's simple, but in reality, the data are a bit messy. And so we have to filter out anomalies in the data, basically points that are much higher than they should be compared to their surroundings. And the problem is not necessarily with the LiDAR data itself, but sometimes we have birds or planes that actually create these anomalies in the LiDAR data set that need to be filtered out. So once we have a canopy height model, we can look at the locations where there is forest vegetation. We can measure the heights of the vegetation at those locations. We can calculate distance from that location to the nearest power line. And we can determine if the vegetation at that location is tall enough and close enough to the power line to actually strike that power line if a tree was wind thrown towards that power line. And so we created a map of all the trees that could pose a risk to the power lines. We call them proximity trees, since they're in close enough proximity to the power line to threaten that power line in the worst case scenario. And I call them proximity trees in quotes because in the GIS world, we work with pixels. It's actually hard to map an actual tree based on the type of LiDAR data that we're using. So we actually map pixel locations, which represent an area 1 meter by 1 meter. And we determine if the vegetation at that location is tall enough to strike the power line. And so there's a close correlation between these pixels and trees. And so we mapped out where all these proximity trees can threaten the power lines. Now we know that there's many thousands of kilometers of power lines in Connecticut where there are trees close enough to strike the power lines. But we want to try to go one step further and see if we can predict where areas are that may be at higher risk for tree failures. So are there environmental factors that could make trees more susceptible to failure that we can use to predict areas at greater risk for outages? And so with the utility data, we knew where all our power lines were, and we knew where they had outages over the previous 15 years. And so we wanted to see, were there different environmental conditions where they've had outages compared to locations where they have not had outages? So we know that there are some conditions that can make trees more susceptible to storm damage or wind throw. For example, if the trees are grown in dense forest conditions and then all of a sudden disturbed by creating a new forest edge, then those trees may not be well adapted to the increased wind exposure that they'll be receiving now that they're on the forest edge. Also, trees that are in certain topographic positions, such as on top of a hill, they will be consistently exposed to winds and perhaps will be well adapted to those consistent wind exposures. Whereas trees that are in valleys may only be exposed to wind occasionally, and those trees may not have been able to adapt to those wind conditions. And so we may see differential damage based on topographic conditions. Soil conditions can affect rooting strength. So if we have very rocky or shallow or hydric soils, the rooting strength for those trees will be weaker, and so they may be more likely to wind throw. And trimming, as we found, has significant effect on reducing outages. And the more recent the trimming occurred, the more likely it is to have a positive effect on reducing outages. Also, land use history could affect outages because more recent disturbances can make trees more susceptible to wind damage until those trees have had a chance to adapt to be exposed to that disturbance. And so we want to find out if the existing geospatial data sets that are available, are they adequate for predicting areas of higher risk for tree failure? And so this is a work in progress. We don't have final results yet, but our preliminary results do indicate that areas with more trees have more outages. That seems pretty obvious. We also found that areas that had more trees on unfavorable soils, like hydric soils, rocky soils, that also tend to be correlated with higher outages. And trees that were located in areas with higher wind exposure, especially locations where the canopy was very rough, with tall trees sticking out above the canopy, those areas tend to be associated with higher rates of outages as well. We did not find terrain indicators or topographic position to be a significant predictor. And this could be because Rhode Island doesn't have very rugged topography. If we did this analysis in New Hampshire or one of the western states with actual mountains, we may find different results in terms of terrain indicators. So what we're working on with this research is to try to use these different environmental conditions and forest conditions. We need to turn them into predictors and figure out what the contribution of each of these conditions is towards increasing outage risk. And that's still a work in progress. So to conclude, for this project, we found that the leaf-off LiDAR data in Connecticut can model forest canopy height with a relatively good accuracy, less than 2-meter error on average. And so we use that LiDAR data to model canopy height and identify risk trees across the entire Eversource Connecticut service area. And our current work is exploring the use of these environmental factors for predicting actual tree risk, to take it one step beyond identifying risk trees and identifying risk trees that also coincide with environmental conditions that will make them more likely to experience damage in storms. Just want to acknowledge Eversource Energy, who provided data for this project, and Eversource and USD McIntyre Stennis provided funding for the project. And so future research directions that I'm planning to take include using remote sensing to monitor forest conditions with the goal of guiding management decisions. And so I'm going to use remote sensing, including satellite and aerial sensors, to map tree mortality and forest health, as well as measure forest and environmental characteristics. And also, I have interest in identifying forest characteristics and environmental factors that can be used to predict forest susceptibility to storm damage and forest pests and disease. And I also have interest in finding out what the needs of the forest and conservation community are, basically to help guide future research directions. So I'm interested in projects both large and small. I have a lot of students who look for projects, to get research experience. And so small projects might be appropriate for students. Larger projects could basically guide future funding, selection of funding opportunities. And so I'd be certainly interested in ideas if anyone has needs that they would like to have explored at the University of Rhode Island through my research program. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Feel free to send me an email if at any point in the future you have suggestions or ideas. And I'd be happy to take any questions now if anyone has any.
Thanks, Jason. That was a terrific overview of a couple of projects that provide a good example of the the types of research that you do. And forgive me for using the Stormwise to describe remote sensing and GIS. I thought that was included, but I see that it's a more focused part of it. But really interesting to learn about that.
Right, and I realized that I didn't talk much about Stormwise, and I'd be happy to talk more about Stormwise. My part of Stormwise basically focused on targeting areas where Stormwise could be applied. For those of you who are not familiar with Stormwise, it's basically a forest management program to manage roadside forests within 100 feet of power lines, and to basically remove dead or dying trees from that area, and to actually use silvicultural treatments to make that forest more healthy. So the idea is that if you thin out a forest by removing some of the less healthy or structurally unsound trees, then you leave more space and resources available to those trees that are left behind, and those trees will be exposed to more winds, will get more light, and will hopefully become more wind firm, more resistant to storm damage. So that's basically the overall goal of Stormwise, is to promote healthy forests by using forest management along those roadside forests. And if you have healthier forests, they'll be less likely to cause damage to the power lines. And with Stormwise, the included in that program is to shift the selection or shift the species along power lines within that 100-meter zone, to shift them towards lower growing species, instead of having full-size canopy species near the power lines. We kind of transition that area along the immediate roadside to shorter growing trees like hornbeam and dogwoods, and species that can't threaten the power lines, and have your taller species growing further away from the power lines where they won't cause any harm to those power lines. So that's basically Stormwise in a nutshell. There are folks at University of Connecticut who are working on developing the silvicultural prescriptions behind Stormwise, and also doing the outreach to educate landowners on how to apply those treatments. The challenge with Stormwise is it requires buy-in from many landowners. The utilities can't implement it because it's basically outside their jurisdiction. And so we require community level support to implement Stormwise, which is why the remote sensing GIS component to identify priority areas is important with that program, because that would be a very long-term goal to implement Stormwise across a large scale.
Thanks. Just one question, just to sort of kick it off, would be, is enhanced tree trimming being applied here in Rhode Island? I believe, National Grid, soon to change its name, as the major utility, and I'm not sure how much practices become standardized and are adopted, across regions and from state to state.
That is a good question. I don't know if National Grid is actually using the enhanced tree trimming program. I assume they have some version of it. They're definitely using standard trimming, but driving, not that I've done much driving these days since we've been working from home, but I haven't seen a lot of areas that appear to have been trimmed with enhanced tree trimming. So I'm not sure exactly what National Grid's programs are. Usually, most utilities have similar programs, so their standard programs are pretty much the same across all utilities. Whether or not utilities are using more aggressive trimming, that's kind of depends on the utility. And I find it interesting that utilities seem to change their name after having major storms and lots of outages. So maybe that's why National Grid is changing their name.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know a lot of us who spend time as field foresters, find ourselves working on projects or marking timber in and around the edges of these areas and power lines sometimes, and how best to to work in those areas, to do forestry in those places is a question I think a lot of us are interested in, but perhaps that's one that's more specific to the silviculture.
Yeah, and Tom Worley at the University of Connecticut has been working on that. How to actually apply forest management to those roadside areas which are difficult to apply traditional practices. And so he was doing some experimenting with small scale harvesting, and having a portable sawmill that he would use to process that wood, and to see if they can get if the economic value of the wood can help offset the costs of that forest management in the roadside, which is traditionally not a very productive location to actually get wood products from. And so if anyone's interested in learning more about that, I'd be happy to pass you along Tom Worley's contact information to see what progress has been made in that area.
That'd be really good. That is TJ. I know that we've toyed around with that, like internally and with the city of Providence, trying to figure out if there's a way to do like a legit urban wood utilization program for street trees. You know, obviously the rural roadside trees, there's a lot of them that get cut down, but like even just using the trees that are in Providence, you know, unique species and things like that, that we can start to make products from that people wouldn't normally, you know, make a table out of, like ginkgo tree, things like that. You know, it's always just been an internal conversation that's never gone anywhere. But if there's success in Connecticut, you know, obviously, you know, I'm sure you know, everyone always looks to the neighboring states to see what's going on. And if it works there, then we adopt it, you know, afterwards. But I'd be happy to have a conversation afterwards to see if there's any progress being made on that front.
Absolutely. And I know Tom Worley was looking into that. He was actually tracking the cost of applying stormwise at some treatment sites, as well as you know, the revenue that was generated. And so
yeah.
he has some actual data that he might be able to share with you on that.
I think that probably
I know
also,
he said that it really depends on the site, you know, the value of the wood that's there, and you know, that has a big effect on whether or not you can actually pay for itself.
Right.
With that operation.
Yeah, I had excuse me, one other question. One of the first slides you showed was the number of outages that were stopped in like a typical year or extreme year. Do you have data on number of customers affected? Like on average, if you have like 300 less outages, how many customers that means? Because sometimes we have an outage that has, you know, 1,200 customers or 3 customers. To be able to show those numbers, I think would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not something we actually modeled, because that really depends on where the outage was located, and we didn't actually try to simulate that. But that is definitely important information. We were looking at, you know, our focus is on basically restoration times. The fewer outages you have, the faster it is to restore them. But obviously, customers affected is a huge impact.
Yeah. Okay. No big deal. I just wondered.
I had a question that was kind of related to that. So are all outages the same, or does enhanced tree trimming eliminate the easy to fix outages? Like a little branch shorted a fuse, but an entire tree falls across the, you know, the road, and you still have to deal with that even though you've spent extra on enhanced tree trimming. Any sense of that?
And that's a great question. And actually, we did look at that. I didn't include in the slides because, you know, for the sake of time, I limited some details. So we did find that enhanced tree trimming does not have any significant effect on reducing major damage, like trees falling and crushing the power lines or poles to the ground. ETT doesn't really prevent that. It prevents, like you said, the easier to fix outages with branches just tripping a fuse and that sort of thing. And that kind of makes sense because enhanced tree trimming can only affect the area within 8 feet of the power line. It can't go and remove hazard trees that are further back from the power line. And that's where a lot of those damaging trees are. They're more than 8 feet from the power line. So the utilities often do have a hazard tree removal where they can go outside their 8-foot zone and remove trees that are clearly a hazard or have some structural deformity that can make them a risk. But ETT doesn't actually address that.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more hazard tree stuff now that gypsy moth has killed oaks everywhere. But that's interesting that you were able to get at that.
Yeah, the utilities record a lot of data when they have an outage. And so one of the things they record is what they did to fix it. And so if they say they had to replace power lines and poles, then they can say, well, there must have been a tree that fell and actually took down the power lines. Whereas if they say that they just reset a fuse, then that's just a branch on the line, an easy fix basically. So we were able to actually evaluate that.
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Paul.
No, sure. First of all, Jason, Paul Rosselli, Burrowville Land Trust. First of all, wow, really great information. I love basic, and I don't mean to suggest that it's any less because of what it, but that kind of observational, collect data type of information is so important and really, really cool. That was really great presentation. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that came to mind almost immediately was David's comment about are all outages created equal, and I think you answered that. The other is more philosophical. We're always thinking about the trees and the lower hanging fruit is always the trees. You cut down the trees, you trim the trees, you do setbacks, you do whatever it is. Around here, Narragansett Electric's National Grid's method of tree thinning is cut it down to the base, and that's a good start. And that's what they do. They just cut it down. They did that in front of my house without even telling me. So the philosophical question is, was any thought given to, I'm looking at my notes over here, and any thought given to a replacement for the business as usual model, which is to go in, trim them, cut them, in my case, eliminate them just right at the base. Is there any other thought given, even in your research, thinking about how to approach this? Can you bury the lines? Are the economics better to just bury the lines instead of spending this enormous amount of time, energy, and money going out there year after year after year, taking out trees, trimming them? For God's sakes, if you've got a stretch like in your last graph picture with the LiDAR information, you found a stretch that seemed to suggest that if there was a major something, storm, hurricane, event, whatever, you're going to get a lot of damage. So bury the lines. Was any thought given to just changing the perspective?
Yeah, actually, we've asked that question ourselves to the utilities, on different occasions. And their answer is that it's much more expensive to bury the power lines than it is to trim. I can't remember what they said the figure was. Yeah, and they said even when you bury the power lines, you still have to have that clearance from the trees because the trees' roots will grow into the underground power lines and cause problems. And so they say you still have to clear the trees anyway. And then underground power lines are more difficult to maintain. If they have a problem, they have to actually dig them up. And it's hard to locate the problem because they're underground. So utilities, they don't like when people say, hey, why don't you bury your power lines? They don't like that very much. Although they are burying a lot of new power lines for new developments, they bury a lot of the power lines for those. And so, I think, maybe like 20% of the power lines in Connecticut are actually underground. They do consider underground power lines for their high risk areas. If they have repeat problems with tree damage in certain areas, apparently do consider putting those lines underground, but it's basically their last resort.
Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yep. And the Stormwise is kind of is UConn's attempt to try to get them to change their business model to basically say, hey, maybe trimming is not the best way to go because you have to go out there every 4 years. It doesn't prevent a lot. That has some effect, but it doesn't prevent a lot of the outages that are occurring. Whereas if you manage the forest and make them more healthy, then you'll have a longer term solution there. Maybe you have to go manage it every 20 years as opposed to going on every 4 years. At the same time, hopefully you end up with a forest that's in a better condition. Definitely a much more difficult solution to implement though than their trimming is easy, and the regulators are, they let them trim. It's easy for utilities to propose that. But for more expensive and invasive treatments, that's a harder sell for the regulators.
Thank you.
Yes.
So there was a mention of the gypsy moth a few moments ago. I think David brought it up, which is certainly has created a lot of hazard trees around the state. But I thought I would just use it as an opportunity to sort of segue into your interest in research on forest health issues, and what are some examples of things that you might think about looking into related to the gypsy moth or other forest health or pest outbreaks.
That's a good question. It's actually a project that we proposed to America View, which is a USGS funded organization that one of their goals is outreach to the community for remote sensing and GIS type work. But one of the project we proposed was to try to predict areas of the forest that are more susceptible to disease or pest outbreaks. And so we want to look at environmental factors that may make forests more susceptible in a given location. So drought was one of the factors that led to gypsy moth outbreaks in certain areas. And so if we can look at terrain or hydrography and try to identify areas that may be more prone to drought conditions, or if there's very dense forest conditions, perhaps that would contribute to disease outbreaks. And so that's what we're hoping to look into, is what factors are actually meaningful in terms of predicting pest outbreaks. And if anyone has suggestions of what factors might be, what environmental conditions might be relevant, I'd be happy to hear them.
Cindy.
Hi, Cindy Kolick, Division of Agriculture. Just to follow up on that conversation, I was wondering, is there anything to do with emerald ash borer and the type of trees? Because we have emerald ash borer present in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, but the issue would be the ash are difficult to remove, especially after they are dead. So I was wondering if there's any preventative, looking into anything preventative to take these trees down before they die, because they're going to become a problem. And TJ mentioned City of Providence kind of stuff was using the wood, or like just on that basis, but City of Providence has a lot of ash as street trees in the wires.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if there's any consideration for that.
So I do know, at least in Connecticut, the utilities are proactively removing ash trees even before they die. I'm not sure what National Grid's doing. I haven't worked as closely with the Rhode Island utilities yet. So I don't know if they're also doing the same. I know that in my area, we have a lot of dead ash trees, and they've been taking those down. I didn't realize that dead ash trees were a problem to take down. I thought they were like any other tree, but I do recall hearing recently that they're somewhat hazardous to take down.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking was, unlike an oak where, it kind of stays solid and you can easily remove it after it's dead. An ash tree becomes more prone to like shattering, I believe, which makes it harder to remove because it kind of just falls apart. So
Okay.
I wasn't sure if there was any, just wondering if you guys consider the types of trees and types of pests.
It's hard for us to do it, through remote sensing. We don't have that kind of detail in our data to be able to identify tree species very easily. We might be able to identify dead trees, individual dead trees, because the data has enough detail for that. But to tell one tree apart from another in terms of species, that's very hard to do. We can do coniferous versus deciduous, but that's the best we can do reliably, which unfortunately would not allow us to identify ash trees in particular.
That makes sense. And then because we're trying to do it preventatively, an ash tree would still be alive when we wanted to take it down versus identifying a dead oak. Yeah.
And there's been some folks looking at using, this certain sensors. They call them hyperspectral sensors that they, basically looks at colors at a large number of different wavelengths in very high detail to see if they can detect different species. But they've been successful at that in northern boreal forest, like in Scandinavia, and it's a lot different with these northeastern forests where we have so much variety. If you look at the trees, the color is all the same. They're all green, and it doesn't matter what wavelength you look, they're not that unique. So it's very challenging.
Yeah. So there's no way of sensing like the color of greenness versus like other colors of greenness.
Yeah, there's just so much overlap with shadowing, and trees can have different amount of chlorophyll depending if the leaves exposed to sun versus in the shade. So there's a lot of variation within an individual tree of the same species. But when you add to that, shading from different levels of the canopy, it just becomes very difficult to do that. I'm not aware of anyone who's successfully done that in the northeastern forest. they can do it in areas where the forests are basically, almost like monocultures, but where they don't have a lot of variety. But yeah, we wish we could do that.
Yeah.
But it's still not here yet.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Rupert?
So Jason, thanks for your presentation. This is in the category of ideas for future research. When I worked in Maryland, we had really good data on forest buffers along streams, where they were and where they weren't. And I don't think that data is available in Rhode Island. So that would be a great project that I think was probably done by remote sensing in Maryland.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, a GIS student could do fairly easily. And, that's definitely something I'll put on my list because students are always looking for projects. I'm kind of surprised it hasn't been done yet for Rhode Island. I know it's been done for Connecticut.
TJ might know. I don't know if it is, TJ, but I've never seen it if it is.
No, I haven't.
Great. So yeah, that's definitely something I'll put on the list. And, one of the things I've been trying to add to projects lately is creating publicly accessible web GIS sites that, you can log into, like Google Earth, and you can see the results of the analysis and see where you have riparian forest, for example, to make it more accessible. And so that's something that we could definitely do.
From a land conservation perspective, that would identify important floodplain areas for protecting forests. So that would be good. And also from sort of the tree planting perspective, places to plant trees.
Great. Yep. That sounds good.
I guess throw another, idea out there for, what remote sensing could do for, conservation. There's, within this group, there's been, a lot of concern about forest fragmentation and, trying to maintain the forest that we have. And, I don't know if anyone else is doing this in Rhode Island, but sort of an up-to-date or more, detailed, look at fragmentation and different types of fragmentation. I've, seen a pretty detailed, Connecticut study, some years ago. And then, this would introduce some human factors that are a bit different from natural ones, but sort of being able to identify areas that are highly susceptible to fragmentation could be interesting, and I think could be useful for getting people's attention to and talking about the issue.
Great. Yeah, actually, I was involved in that study you mentioned back in Connecticut with the forest fragmentation. I'm new to Rhode Island, and so I'm not familiar with what's already been done here, which is why it's very helpful for me to talk to you folks. And forest fragmentation is actually something I had the students do this past semester for parts of Rhode Island, and we could certainly scale it up to the entire state and make that data available.
Terrific.
One thing I'll say, Jason, too, is I don't know if probably haven't been connected with our forest health specialist here at DEM, Paul Ricard. He's not on the call right now, but I can hook you up with him and we can have a good conversation and share all the data we have that would be related to when you were talking earlier about forest types susceptible to disease or drought stresses or things like that. We might not necessarily have the forest type that would tell you that, but we could show you the data from past years of stressors affecting our forests. So you can take a look at it. We know we've been in a drought for a number of years, and you can look at the timelines of what's dead or dying based on all of those environmental factors. So that'll be good. We can hook you up with that and show you, at least show you what we do in the program too, because there's specific tasks that we do that might be correlated to the research that you're doing.
Great. So, yeah, that'd be very helpful. I'd look forward to talking about that with you and Paul Ricard. I've heard Paul Ricard's name, but I don't think I've actually met him yet. So that'd be great to meet him too.
Yeah, perfect. And I know that I believe you and I met with Sean O'Rourke. It was like 2 years ago, probably now.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about National Grid and their updated, I think they were able to, they doubled their tree trimming budget that year. But like you said, I don't believe that they're instituting any of these practices that you're talking about. So I think it would be good too if we had like a follow-up date with Sean just to talk about the research that you have, whether or not if it's updated from what was a couple of years ago, because we did get a little bit of movement with National Grid in that regard because of the gypsy moth things. Gypsy moth might be not as open in the environment right now, but the effects are still there, obviously. and we're starting to see
Yeah.
effects in white pine trees, and it's just the new thing is here. So it's, time is of the essence to be able to have that conversation. I think they'd be open to it too.
Okay, that sounds great. I did connect with National Grid last fall. There was a proposal we submitted to National Science Foundation, and National Grid was on board with that. But we're still waiting to see if it gets funded, and so I haven't followed up with National Grid yet to try to get data from them or connect on or discuss their programs.
Okay.
And so that'd be great. If Sean and you were available to chat, I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll talk to Sean. It's always, he gets things done. It's funny, like if it's the right person in the right room. So I'll talk to him.
Great, thanks.
Any more questions for Jason or things to share with him? Great. That's a good, robust, Q&A and discussion there. Thanks so much again, Jason, and I really appreciate your joining us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your feedback. That's very useful information to me, and look forward to moving forward with some of your suggestions and hopefully deliver some products that will be useful to the forest community.
Great. Well, we can just shift gears a bit now and sort of have a discussion about what we would like to do with summer Rhode Island Woodland Partnership meetings or gatherings. We've been meeting, having pretty successful monthly Zoom meetings on the whole since March of 2020. But I know there's things are starting to open up again, and some interest in possibly meeting in person this summer, visiting partner sites or tours, but just thought I'd throw it open to discussion on this topic. And Kate, you'd conducted a survey that a few members responded to, and do you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. I haven't checked it in a few days, but of the responses that we had, I think everyone is open to meeting in person, either indoors or outdoors. There was not a difference between that response. Although I do want to note that we had one response that the Zoom platform opens our meetings up to more people, and I think I do agree with that. So keeping that on the list in the background for sure. I think it would, since everyone who did respond seemed good with meeting in person, it would be good to find a spot that would work for all of us. And that's pretty much it. I can open it up too. Hold on. All right, can everyone see that? Everyone see that? Thumbs up?
That's
okay. So we did have, so there have been more responses in the last couple days. And that's where we are. We have NRICD as an option, indoor or outdoor settings, the RIFCO woodlot. So kind of up for discussion.
If I could just make a comment, just because we're doing a lot of field work, it might be good to continue Zoom just during the field season. I think I might have made a comment about that in here.
Yep.
But that's really my only concern.
Oh, you had something as if you had an idea for something that you or an idea of something that we could be done up in Burrillville.
Sure. Thanks, Christopher, and thanks, Kate, for putting this poll together. I have some really strong feelings about continuing Zoom the way it is. We're a conservation organization. The idea of getting in cars and traveling is really foreign to me now, for no particular reason than just to meet. I just put gas in the car this morning, and that cost me $40. That was the first time in about, I don't know, a week. It was maybe a little more than a week, maybe 10 days. I can absolutely show you the gas bill that I got, that I take part in a year ago, before this all started, and it was $40 every 5 or 6 days, $40. And I was traveling Providence, Warwick, Cranston, all over the place. I don't want to drive that way anymore. I want to live the life that I'm talking about. And if I continue to talk about reducing carbon emissions, I want to exhibit that type of stuff. On that note, I think meeting quarterly or every once in a while outdoors, I think, is a better way to go. That gives us a little more interest. It's not just a meeting, but it's a chance to experience it. In Burrillville, what I was alluding to early on is that over the last couple of days, we've been announcing that the Burrillville Land Trust will be the first in Rhode Island to actually start planting in the wild a germplasm of the American chestnut. We've been working with the American Chestnut Foundation, and I forgot the other foundation that we're working with, but we're working with at least 2, if not more, organizations. We've received germplasm. We've received American chestnut from Georgia. We're about to get some from Massachusetts and Connecticut, and it'll be the first time that they'll actually be planted in the wild. Last couple of days, we've planted 8 from Georgia. And the reason was a shock to me, was that at least the reason they gave us was that 50, 60, 100 years from now, the temperature will be warmer here. So these trees are somewhat tolerant, although I'm not sure what that meant. We're still figuring that out, but they're tolerant to higher temperatures. So we can do a hike. We can get some folks together, talk about the American chestnut tree. There's a lot of American chestnut saplings, some in flower. I can't believe it. I've walked that property maybe the last 20 years. First time I've seen American chestnuts actually flower. So I'm offering that both as a place and as a philosophical underpinning of why we should get together.
Hey, Paul, could I ask you a question, please?
Yes, please.
Is one of those locations Nipmuc River, that trail?
It is not. No, we're a private land trust. We're not connected with the town.
Oh, okay.
So the Nipmuc property is owned by the town and managed through the Burrillville Conservation Commission. We're the Burrillville Land Trust. We're a nonprofit private land trust within the town and not connected with the town at all.
Okay, yeah, I have some caps traps there, so I was thinking maybe we could do a combination, like
you've actually put some traps on our property at South Shore near Wallem Lake. We've had forestry come over and release some of the little wasps for the emerald ash borer. We can look at those and see if there's any effect. Got me. Now they're kind of tiny and they just kind of fly away, so I don't know. But we can talk about that too. But we've had folks from do traps for the emerald ash borer, do traps for what's the other one? There's a couple of other ones.
I have a couple out there for different forest pests like monocamus beetles, and they're not like commonly known invasives.
Yeah, this was a trap that was high up in the tree, and it was a substantial trap. This was a big thing.
Was it green?
Yes.
It was probably emerald ash borer trap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we could do that too. And the Wallem Lake property along South Shore Road is one of our properties as well. That's
Cool.
16 acres. this time of year, it's loaded with mountain laurel, loaded.
I just second what Paul said about not not traveling all over hell and gone just to meet. I'm happy to travel if there's something we want to go see, if the traveling adds something to the meeting. But these meetings on Zoom have been great. I've been able to participate a lot more than I did before because, this is 2 hours by the time I get in and out of it. But if you add an hour of driving on each end, then it's basically the only thing you do all day. So it would, I don't mind. I definitely don't mind traveling for something, and quarterly would work, or whatever. Whenever we thought we had a reason to go somewhere and see something. So that's my sense of it for me.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, so I'm hearing an interest in maintaining the Zoom meetings with periodic in-person gatherings if we're going on a field trip, or if there's something to see beyond just being around a table together.
And winter up here, we can all go snowshoeing. Great snowshoeing place.
Assuming we could even get there.
I'm also comfortable with any of the land trust suggestions for the next meeting. I think it would be nice to all be outside and looking at something and talking about work. And yeah, we all haven't seen each other yet, and we see each other all the time, but in person will be nice for the quarter or whatever it is.
I like that idea. Want to shoot for that for July, say?
You're more than welcome to come up here in July.
Paul, I'll coordinate with you just to put something on the schedule with instructions of where to go and parking and all of that, and we'll get that out to the group.
All right. So the standing, date for our July meeting would be, Thursday, July 15th. That that 1 p.m. time, and can just keep that if that works.
I also wanted to mention that because I also have done a presentation, I think one of the advantages of the Zoom meeting is that we're able to record presentations and be able to like recap or see them later or send them out to other people who may be interested. So I think that is a really cool thing if we do like more presentations and can record them. And I think, is it, David, are you hosting them on like the Rhode Island Natural History Survey?
Yeah. Although I was just feeling guilty about not doing last month's yet. It's been a really busy month, but yes, I am happy to do them. And actually for somebody who does a presentation like Jason, where it's like a coherent package by itself, I'm happy even to do both, to put the whole meeting up and then to split Jason's out so people can just watch his. I'm happy to do that. I was just going to say, Cindy, that the 15th of July is the CAPS meeting.
Yes, in the morning.
So yeah. I could travel north just once, which would be cool. Maybe we could,
the
acknowledge
CAPS meeting is not in person, though. We are still keeping it virtual. Yeah, so.
All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah. And speaking of recordings, I was unmuted the whole time I was eating my lunch, and I was eating chips, and I had a window open. So I hope that I didn't disturb you guys.
I didn't hear anything.
Okay, because I mean, I think one of my interns came in and was eating, and she had like started talking, and I was kind of like, oh, but
I can fix it in post.
Okay, yeah, because then I was like, oh, I'm not muted because it said something, and I was like, oh no, I have the window open and I'm right on Route 6. So.
Also, David, if you could cut out if you want, the first bit of the meeting, I kind of had to hit record and go dress a wound. So we're all good.
I usually try to clean up the starts and stops so that it works better. Depends a little bit on how much time I have, but I'll do what I can. Happy to.
Great. Well, it sounds as if we have a plan that people are happy with for the July meeting, and as we share the output of our conversation and what we're planning on for next month with the Woodland Partnership list, I expect we may get some feedback or other ideas So perhaps we can just plan that one for now, and we can go ahead from there. But I do hear the consensus that Zoom has, been really working better than pretty well in a lot of ways. Certainly for, pulling in partners from further afield or hadn't been able to participate in the in-person meetings at NRCS. So I think we'll make a note of wanting to continue that. All right. Any further comments on that topic? We can shift into partner updates then at this point. It's the last main part of the meeting. And Kate, I know you were interested in going first, or if this is a good time for you to do your update.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly introduce Marina Capraro, who is on the call, but her video and microphone are not working. Marina is taking over for me at the Conservation District. She started on Monday, so she will be the new face of Southern New England Heritage Forest and a lot of the other forestry stuff I'm working on, like Legacy. So expect her at our meetings, and I am out at the end of this week, but I will be back as the new Rupert. So that's pretty much it. And I will be back, bouncing back and forth again. So sorry I keep leaving and coming back, but that's about it. So thanks.
Kate, you're coming on to your new role in the first week of July, is that right?
Yeah, July 6th.
Right. And what should, after you, as you leave the district, people, if we want to contact you for work, how should we do that?
I'm putting it in the chat.
Great.
There you go.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Why don't we go over, we can just go over, let's hear from folks at DEM next. Why don't we start, we'll start with TJ.
Okay. Thank you. Really quick, so I don't have too much to talk about. Scott kind of covered the stuff with the legislation, and I think everything's good there. Like he said, when we had that conversation, Ryan Mulcahy and I, it was a fine conversation. So anything that's happening now, who knows? But I think it's all good. Big update: we got a grant that was issued to us just this week from the Sustainable Urban Forest Resilience Fund, which is a new fund from the Forest Service. It's the second year they've done this grant program where there was a surplus of money for the Consolidated grant program that funds most of our programs. And instead of just dividing it and giving it to the states, they made a competitive grant process. And it was divided into two sections. One was for strictly emerald ash borer projects. That was, I think, like $2 million. And then there was a $500,000 set aside for this Sustainable Urban Forestry Resilience, which was basically anything other than EAB. So we put in a grant request for $100,000 to continue the work that we have been doing with communities with the Doris Duke Urban Forestry Grant with the Tree Equity Score Analyzer. And we got awarded that grant. So it's a dollar for dollar match. And we're going to be using that $100,000 to work with the Providence Neighborhood Planting Program and the city of Newport with their health equity zones, which is essentially like canned projects we already have that weren't able to be funded through that existing program that we're doing with Doris Duke. So we'll be able to extend the work we're doing with them, which is really great. And that can further showcase, the work we're doing with that Tree Equity Score Analyzer, which is really nice. That's kind of the big one with us. The other one is we have a couple of positions that are open right now. They might be closed. We're going to be hiring now that we're merged with Ag, I don't know if I'm stealing any of your thunder, Cindy, but we're hiring a new Ag marketing specialist position, which is going to be working with agriculture and forestry. And that's it's the first person that's hired as our like joint division. And one of their tasks is going to be specifically on continuing the marketing efforts they do in Ag, but then in the same vein doing forest products marketing. So actually having someone on board that's going to be focused on forest products marketing in state and kind of starting that program from scratch. So my first hope is they're starting mid-July, so probably in August. I'm going to invite that individual to the Woodland Partnership meeting just to get to know everybody and really work with you all to figure out what partners are looking for in someone that's going to start marketing forest products in the forest products industry in Rhode Island. And then there is another ag marketing specialist position that's open right now, but that one hasn't been hired. And we're hiring a new office staff position who's going to be working alongside Deborah here in forestry, who's going to be taking on a larger role both in forestry and ag as our office manager of sorts, but then having support that's going to be helping both divisions. So bumping up our numbers a little bit through retirements. I don't think we're growing any, but people have retired, so we're backfilling, which is nice. But that's about it.
Thanks, TJ. Congratulations on the grant. That's great news, and encouraging as well that the division's hiring these folks too. We'll
Yeah,
look forward to meeting them here.
Nancy is not on the call, but she is, I believe, 4 for 4 in trying to get competitive grants. And I think prior to her arrival, we probably had like 1 in a decade. So having that position and having her in place has really been beneficial to us. So the work that she's doing with you guys and everything, it's coming back in spades with the amount of money that we're getting. So it's great.
That's a great batting average.
Yeah.
Let's go over to Sydney. Do you have any updates you'd like to share?
Nothing big as of the last time I gave an update. But so our caps traps are all set. So we have 15 sites for pine and 16 sites for oak throughout the state. Some of those sites are the same sites depending on how much room we had there to space traps out. So we just finished our first week of trap checking and sampling, and so far I have not identified anything of concern, which is great. And then the other pest we have been finding is it seems like the beech leaf disease, which I think most of you are familiar with. It seems like it's been spreading, and I actually got a call yesterday from somebody who purchased a tree from a nursery, and I guess they were having an aphid issue, and they went to go treat it and found beech leaf disease. Now we've kind of discovered it's spreading that way as well. So that's concerning. And so, I passed the information along to Paul Ricard, our forest health person, and also Nancy Stairs. And we're not sure, this person found it in Bristol. So we're not sure, if it's there yet, and he's concerned, and he was very amenable to taking these trees out too. So I think that was, pretty good for a citizen to call and voluntarily offer to fix their problem. But other than beech leaf disease, no spotted lanternfly on our radar yet, which, knock on wood. I don't know if you guys heard that, but I did knock on wood. So hopefully we'll be able to mitigate that for a whole another year before we get spotted lanternfly. But we were able to, and I may have updated you guys on the last call, so I'm sorry if this is repeat information, but we actually got approval to set up spotted lanternfly traps, which we haven't had in the past. It's all been through visual survey, and it's like the preferred method is visual. So actually like going to these sites and looking at Tree of Heaven for signs of spotted lanternfly. But this year we got approval to do traps, which is actually a lot better in my eyes than visual survey, because we're only going to one place at one time, and if it's not there then we don't catch it. But a trap gives us a little bit more time to see if there's like a passing population that's going through there. So we have some traps set up in Lincoln at Lincoln Woods. We have traps set in graveyards in Pawtucket and Providence because they're close to the highways and close to the railways, and they have Tree of Heaven. So and I'm looking into a few other places that have Tree of Heaven and also would give me permission to set traps up. So if anyone's aware of any places that do have a lot of Tree of Heaven that are in areas of like high commerce and the owners of the property would be agreeable, please pass on that information. I'd be happy to contact them and set a trap in their property. But other than that, things are going smoothly. That's about it for the CAPS update. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Cindy. Sounds like you have plenty going on this field season.
Yeah, it's been busy.
Fern, shifting over to you. Anything from the Service Forestry Program?
I don't think I have any updates at this time.
All right. Let's see. How about David with the Natural History Survey?
Just two things. First, we are going to have a BioBlitz. The delayed Cumberland BioBlitz in Mercy Woods will be October 1st and 2nd. And looks like we're going to be able to run it more or less like we usually do with overnight camping and with Science Central. We're kind of in the early stages of putting that plan back together again. This will be the first fall BioBlitz since 2001. So, it won't match with the seasonality of our other BioBlitzes, but there are a lot of people who like the prospects for the weather in October as opposed to June. And I don't know, who knows, maybe we'll do more fall ones. So mark your calendars, October 1st and 2nd, Friday, Saturday, 2 p.m. to 2 p.m. at Mercy Woods in Cumberland, just about as far north and east as you can get. We'll see what's there. So the other thing is, I think I mentioned it last time, I'll just mention it again. We are organizing a one-day science conference on Thursday, November 18th. The subject is restoration. And so the call for abstracts is out. So look around for that. We're looking for papers, posters on subjects of restoration, and it could be habitat restoration, species restoration, could be dam removals, salt marsh elevations, and we're looking for a keynote or a plenary session that'll look at kind of the higher level questions related to whether restoration is even a relevant term in this day and age. So it should be really good. Mark your calendars, Thursday, November 18th.
Where will it be?
Quonset O Club, as where we usually had it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Well, thanks. Glad you'll be able to get that BioBlitz in, and it sounds like a promising conference to bring people together in November. Why don't we go over to John with the Narragansett Bay Refuge?
Thanks, Chris. I am still new here and doing a lot of listening and learning, and I'm starting to formulate kind of crazy ideas of how this research reserve can do more research oriented towards stewardship, and what that means, whether that's sites, Cindy, for your kind of traps that might provide more companion sites. So a lot of crazy ideas come up, or we're going to have some leaf on full color flights that are actually done for eelgrass, but because the islands that we manage are surrounded, we actually have the entire island. So Jason, maybe there's something there as I work to manage the 4,500 acres out here that we can look at some stuff. So just a lot of opportunities that I think this research reserve can be put to good use that are not just about the islands that we have here, but help Rhode Island and the region, and looking at management research is what I'm hoping to push towards. Thanks, and I'm glad to be here. I look forward to meeting in person.
Great, thank you, John. Let's go down to South County and Patrick, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone. Everything's going well. I attended the Forestry for the Birds workshop on Tuesday with Paul Dolan and Chris Mosset from NRCS. It was great. Walked around the Norman Bird Sanctuary, and it was a beautiful night and learned a lot from it. Other than that, I've been busy helping my boss with the Potter Hill Dam project. We had our second public meeting last Thursday, which went really well. And yeah, I think that's about it. Dr. Perrin, I'm not sure if you remember me, but I took your NRS 509 class fall semester. So it was really great to, see some real world applications of GIS.
Thanks, Patrick. And I did recognize your name. And so I fear you're the same person in the class last fall. So it's good to see you at the meeting, or to hear you at the meeting.
Thanks, Patrick. Why don't we go on to Paul, back to Paul about the Burrillville. Any more to report, Paul? Paul, not sure Paul's there right now. Jason, anything you would like to, give an update on from your work, or the department, or at URI as you see fit?
Not that I can think of. I guess I could say that I didn't mention the resources we have available within the NRS department, but we do have capabilities of collecting LiDAR data from air and ground. And so if that would factor into any of your research ideas, then keep in mind that we do have those capabilities to collect that data, across small areas using drones or handheld equipment. So if that's of interest, I'll be happy to talk more about it.
Thanks. Keep that in mind. May have something for you. Paul, I see that you're back. Do you have any more updates that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Oh, lots of updates. On that same day that you come up here and we all have a hike and take a look at some American chestnut trees, starting at, if you hang around, if you want to go out for dinner, we can go out for dinner afterwards. We can also, on that day, I'm starting what I've been calling the conservation conversations, trying to get environmental folks, and at this particular time, it'll be at Bravo Brewing, a craft brewery in beautiful downtown Pascoag, right next to the Clear River, beautiful location. And you can come up, have a brew. We can talk ad nauseum about whatever it is you want to talk about. And it would be the perfect ending to what I know will be a perfect day. So and there are a lot of other updates, but those are the two that I'd like to mention here.
Great, thanks, Paul. Got just a couple of updates to share myself. Regarding the Oak Resiliency Grant. Looking ahead to July 27th and 28th. It's going to be a sort of a hybrid workshop related to the rollout of the Oak Resiliency assessment tool that I've been talking about for a while now. That's really targeting foresters and allied professionals in particular, but also experienced land trusters or folks or landowners like graduates of the Covert program who have some experience with their land. And it's this web-based tool to walk you through a series of questions to assess the vulnerability and adaptive capacity of it could be a stand of oaks or a whole property. And there's going to be a sort of a field workshop up at the Norcross Wildlife Sanctuary in South Central Mass, for those who are able to make it in person. And we're hoping to do a hybrid component so that people can participate from around the 3 states. But we're really looking forward to to pushing that tool out and hopefully having people use it, given the work from the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative and the Northern Institute for Applied Climate Science that's gone into it. And also as part of that project, just an idea to put out there, but with about 1 year and a month or 2 left on the grant, we're looking at conducting a 3 sort of workshops geared towards professionals of different natural resources and conservation stripes in each of the 3 states. I think there's going to be one at the Quabbin Reservation in the fall. There's maybe one in Connecticut that's coming together on their South Central Connecticut Regional Water Authority site, looking at slash walls and oak regeneration. And I think it would be nice to host one, here in Rhode Island as well, if any of you have ideas or sites in mind for what we might do for that. Certainly the small slash wall at the Rifco woodlots of interest. It's also those of us who are here in Rhode Island have been there a lot, but open to other ideas too. So if you have some, feel free to reach out to me. And then finally, I am with Bill Buffum now, recently retired from Rhode Island. I'm taking over the maintenance of the Rhode Island Woods website, and talked about this periodically, but we'll be able to going forward, have a little bit of time to update the Woodland Partnership page, and I'm interested in in your thoughts on that, or the site in general for I mean Rhode Island Woods, for what we might do with it, or how you think it could be improved, and so forth. So perhaps we'll save some time to have a sort of focal discussion of that at a future meeting. So that's it from me. Any other updates or questions or anything anyone would like to share? All right. Well, Kate and Paul and I will work on organizing this July 15th field extravaganza in Burrillville, and we'll be in touch about that. But thanks to all of you for joining us and staying with us for the full meeting on what's such a beautiful June day, and hope that you can get out and enjoy it from here on. But thanks again, and see you soon.